Welcome, everyone. This is the regular Board of County Commissioners meeting on Wednesday, November 4th. We've got a little bit of snow outside, more up on the mountains, and I guess winter is here. I'm going to start by asking the manager, do we have any additions or deletions to today's agenda?
There are no additions or deletions to the agenda.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move on to public comments. Are there any members of the public here to speak to issues that are not on today's agenda? Seeing none, we will move on to commissioner comments. Who would like to begin? Patty.
Yes, I want to thank the county staff and the voters for yesterday. County staff did an amazing job. I stopped by a couple times to bring them chocolate just to make sure they were keeping their energy levels up in the clerk's office. Yeah, the county clerk, the elections department. And I want to thank the voters. We had a good turnout for an off election year. People are really getting the hang of these mail-in ballots, getting them in, getting them signed. So every year it gets better. So we'll be looking forward to next year's election, which will be bigger, and we will be in new space, new leased space, which will be in the downtown core, and the public will have more information about that as the election draws near next year. So I want to thank everybody again for their time and their patience in the election.
Very good. George, no comments? Okay. I would just make a couple of comments. One is that I just think this was a great day for the kids of the Valley. Yesterday was a great day, waking up to these results. Great day for education. Proposition BB passed, which allows the excess marijuana tax revenues to go into the BEST fund, which is building schools. It's capital construction. It was a program started by our own state Senator Gail Schwartz, so that's nice to see some funds in there. And then also both school districts passed their proposals, and so I think that's, again, good for high quality education in our community. So like Patty, I'd like to thank everybody for participating and voting. We saw some other good things: continued support of Aspen Valley Hospital, support of the various fire districts throughout our valley, and matters like that. So congratulations. Congratulations for all those who ran in the school board contest. It's always nice to see people stepping up for their civic duty, and congratulations to the winners.
Can I just add one?
Please.
I really want to thank people for the support of the county's broadband question. We barely got it passed. It was 93.7. 93% to 7%, so we do appreciate the support on that. We'll see where we can take it from here.
Yeah, it seems like something that's been felt across the state, that we need to take more control of those issues. There's one item I'd like to bring up for consideration later in the open discussion, but I'll mention it now so board members can begin to think about it. And that is that there was a fire at the 3rd Street Center in Carbondale. It was about a month or so ago, and there's been some damage to the building. They have insurance, but it's about $15,000 worth of damage, $5,000 deductible. So I'd like to ask the board to consider a contribution from our contingency fund towards those repairs later. It's a facility that, although it's in Carbondale, it's outside of PitkinCounty, it certainly houses a great number of Valley nonprofits that we often work with, as well as a meeting space that we use regularly. I was just down there for the Watershed Summit that Rudai Water and Power Authority put together. So we'll talk about that later. We'll now move on to the consent items. We only have a single item, a single reading, and it's a resolution setting commissioner salaries. John Peacock.
Yeah, and Rich, I can give a brief overview. On September 15th, the board had a work session regarding Senate Bill 15288, which was a bill passed in the last legislative session adjusting the salaries for elected officials in Colorado. For the public, the salaries for elected officials in Colorado counties, at least statutory Colorado counties, are set by state statute. PitkinCounty is a home rule charter county, and so our charter allows the board to set the salaries of other elected officials like the sheriff, assessor, and clerk and recorder. However, our charter also states that the Board of County Commissioner salaries shall be determined by state statute, shall be equal to what state statute sets. The salaries for statewide elected offices had not been adjusted since 2007, and this is consistent with past practices. It seems to take 10 to 12 years for these salary bills to be updated. And during that time, there's no adjustments for cost of living, inflation, nothing. And so when these salary bills come up, they typically include a pretty significant one-time increase. This was true back in 2007. There was a nearly 30% increase proposed at that time. The same was true with Senate Bill 15288. It proposed a 30% increase for elected officials in the state. What's different about Senate Bill 15288 from past commissioner salary bills is that one, it establishes a method to adjust the salaries of elected officials by Denver Boulder CPI so that there won't be that necessarily consistent loss in terms of inflationary pressures and these rather large one-time increases when they come up every 10 or 12 years. The second thing that's different that brings us to this meeting and resolution today is that unlike past bills, in the past, counties have been placed into 6 categories, and only 6 categories for the purposes of setting salaries. In this case, the bill has kept those 6 categories, but has established subcategories under them, A through D, each with different levels of pay increases associated with them. Subcategory A counties have a 30% increase, subcategory B counties have a 20%, C counties 10%, and D counties 0. All counties under the bill are presumed to be subcategory A. But so with no action, the 30% pay increase would kick in. At our work session, however,
To clarify, for the next round of county commissioners, not
for the next
current.
round of county commissioners taking
2017.
office after, January 2016. Thank you for that clarification. What the bill does is it presumes that all counties will be in that subcategory A. Counties have the ability to petition the legislature to change to a different or lower subcategory if they believe that is in the best interest of their community and organization. So at our work session on September 15th, we discussed those options with the board. The board discussed those options amongst yourselves, and the board provided direction to staff that when a bill is being proposed, that we make a request to be moved to a subcategory C from an A, which would mean that for commissioners taking office after January 2016, the salary would increase by 10% versus the 30%. In terms of what that means, in our current 5-year plan, the board is currently looking at our budget. If we were to remain a subcategory A county over the 5 years, that would be an additional cost of $413,000. By moving to a subcategory C county, that cost is $171,334 estimated, meaning that if the board is successful, if the board is successful in petitioning the legislature for that subcategory change, it means a $242,000 decrease in our 5-year plan. With that, I would just note that CCI is working with a sponsor to run a bill for counties wishing to change their subcategory. In front of you today is a resolution directing staff to basically pursue that change in subcategory when legislation is introduced.
Thank you for that background, John. Patty?
I have a question. So I support moving forward with the 10%, not the 30% automatic. But what happens if the state legislature, in all their wisdom, decides not to do that and just make it mandatory, then we would be set at 30%, right?
That's correct.
And it'd be
That's
totally out
not-
of our hands as a Board of Commissioners.
It's not your decision, it's the state legislature's decision. They've simply provided this mechanism and you can request a change.
I think we're thinking that this state will go ahead and allow us to make a selection, but I want the public to know, just in case the state legislature fails to do that, it was not our choice to go to a 30% increase, which is significant hit to our budget.
I would add a little more background or filler around this question. Pitkin County is one of only 2 home rule counties in the state of Colorado. And so we have had the ability to set our clerk, assessor, and sheriff salaries separate from the state legislature creating a salary bill. So we've adjusted those salaries in the past to be more competitive. Part of the real impetus throughout the state has been that you have sheriff's deputies making more than the sheriff, or you have clerk assistants or clerk specialists, say like an election specialist, making more than the clerk. And that leaves no one interested in running for the position if they're going to take a large salary cut. And so we've had that ability to correct that imbalance prior. And so that also then gave us more of this ability to only take a 10% for future boards. The other counties are kind of stuck taking the full 30% if they would like their sheriff to get the full 30% increase. So we're really very fortunate that we can adjust these more accordingly and more appropriate to our county. So with that, this is not a public hearing, but I would take a motion or further comments.
I'd make a motion to approve.
Okay.
I will second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John.
We're now going to move to individual consideration items. These are the first readings and will be set for a public hearing on November 18th. I'd like to see Dale is going to be presenting on this one, and it is the ordinance authorizing the Dottie Fox Overlook acquisition. And before you get started, Dale, I should make a point of saying that Steve Child is sick today. He was unable to come into the meeting, and I believe Michael is out of town as well. So,
thank you, Rachel. And not only is Steve sick, but Matt Adeletti is also sick, and he was all teed up to present this to you today. So I'm pitch hitting, and I have to confess I'm not as familiar with every single detail in this as I might otherwise be. But the basics are that this acquisition comes to us not as an exaction, as we mistakenly said in the memo, but as a donation that resulted from discussions between the landowner and the Snowmass Capital Caucus. The caucus and the landowner are represented here today. And the agreement was that if the development proceeded in a certain manner, that this parcel would be donated to Pitkin County to become an overlook that would be in memory of Dottie Fox. Now, everyone probably knows Dottie Fox was one of the 3 Maroon Bells, very significant person in our history and the history of championing wilderness in our valley. Where this parcel sits, if you crest Watson Divide heading towards Old Snowmass, and you come around a kind of a sweeping right-hander, and then there's a switchback to the left that turns all the way around. There's a place where people have been pulling off the road and driving up onto this land. Frankly, in its current condition, it's a bit of a mess because it gets some four-wheel traffic, and that traffic has not been kind to this little area. But this little area has a commanding view of Mount Sopris and some of the large ranches that have been conserved by the open space program and of the Old Snowmass area generally. So it's a wonderful place that we could restore with a financial contribution also from the landowner, which we appreciate, and repurpose it as a place where people can stop and take in that view and remember Dottie and all of that. So I can't imagine any reason that we shouldn't accept this. And I appreciate the generosity of the landowner as well as the activism of the Snowmass Caucus, and I'm wondering if any of them would like to say anything about this.
We're happy to if you'd like.
Pardon me a second. You'll need to come up to the microphone to say something, and we will invite members of the caucus up, or the landowner. We are in our temporary location here at the Gantt conference room because the clerks need to use our regular meeting room for the elections.
We like your meeting room.
Okay, just identify yourself for the record, please.
Tim McFlynn and John Clark is also here, who's the current board chair of the Snowmass Capitol Creek Caucus through the 17th, I think, when we will celebrate, have a party for John. But anyway, just what I'd like to add to what Dale said, and I'm sort of wearing more than one hat, but Matt, who wrote the memo, captured well in the first page who Dottie Fox was in this valley in her lifetime. And I would summarize all of that as she was really a force of nature. She really was. She was amazing in her effectiveness because of how charismatic she was and reasonable she was. In adding wilderness, she was one of the founders of Wilderness Workshop along with Connie Harvey and Joy Caudill, who impacted all of the wilderness areas around us in this valley. She was very supportive of the creation of the open space program in 1990, and she was very active on the Snowmass Caucus board. And more than that, her number one issue once she moved to live on Snowmass Creek was protecting the quality of the Snowmass Creek watershed and Snowmass Creek itself. So I think it's a great opportunity to acknowledge that. I'm also on the Open Space Board, which has known about this, but it really began, I think, in about 2008 or so when a prior landowner wanted to land a TDR and have a very large house on top of Watson Divide. And in that back and forth, as often happens, the caucus and the landowner reached an agreement to have more underground space, fewer square feet above ground, a different scale of a house, natural earth materials, etc., and donate a portion of that 6 acres, 1.6, right at the switchback, which wasn't really of much utility. It's basically a sage meadow at that switchback. And the caucus came in supporting his application with community development, with that donation as one of the things he offered. It's not an exaction, it was just kind of a collaboration. And the land changed hands, I think, 2 more times, but the current owner is willing to do the same thing, and that was also worked out with the owner and his representative and the caucus board this past year. And I think that's all I would add in the way of background. From the point of view of open space, if it's a fee ownership rather than an easement, which is the proposal for 1.6 acres, we would then undertake a management plan. We have a lot of those in the queue. It wouldn't happen immediately. The way it sits now, you know, it probably is the way it'll be for a year or more. But the idea that the board has tossed around, but the staff does the management plan and you get to approve it, would be something not, quote, improved, but rather something that's a place for solitude, not a place for vehicles or motorized things. It's only at 1.6 acres. There's a huge parking area on that switchback. There could be a meandering single track up to a high point, maybe with a table or a bench. Something that simple is what we've thought of, but of course it's the staff who look at the wildlife and all the other things to come up with a management plan. But that's, since this is a public session, I thought I would just say that much, and thanks for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Tim?
I don't have any questions for Tim, just
Okay,
comments.
I have one I would like to ask. Earlier this summer or this spring, I received an email from who I believe to be the neighbor of this parcel, Timothy Marquand.
Yes,
And-
he's one of the two neighbors.
One of the two neighbors. And I instructed him basically to be sure to, make public comment to the record and to talk to the caucus, that, it really probably wouldn't really come to our desk, and any conversations would be disclosed as they are now. So it was just a short email, and I instructed him that way. Do you know, are they satisfied with this, or are they still objecting to the landing of the TDR next to their residence?
I really don't know. I don't know whether John knows, but I know Mr. Marquand. He's lives right on the top of the ridge in a
Very
modest
simple
house. But I don't know the answer to your question, Rachel. I can tell you that John or I, now knowing this, can certainly ask him to share with us and community development or whomever if he has objections. But I have not seen them.
Okay, well, I appreciate that. I just wanted to know because he expressed that he was concerned the caucus was all in favor of this because of the land giveaway, but he was the one who was going to live with the impacts next door.
Oh, I think that's the impacts of the size of the house,
Yes.
not the dedication of the.
Correct.
Okay.
But he was feeling that that's why the caucus was supporting the larger home instead of his concerns as a neighbor.
I just don't know.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you for answering that question. And the other one thing I would like to add, in talking to Steve Child this morning, who called me to let me know he was sick and wasn't going to come in, he wanted to express that the caucus had worked very hard for this and that he was very supportive of it. So just wanted to express that on Steve's behalf. Patty?
Yeah, I have a question. It's always been my understanding since I was part of this before, now I'm bringing it back again, which is nice, that we're actually going to get this done. The concern was the public safety at that corner with that makeshift parking area. Now that it hopefully will come into county ownership, are we going to be doing anything to help manage any public safety road issues?
Well, certainly we won't undertake any type of changes to the landscape until we've gone through our management planning process, which is going to include consultation with GR and the Road and Bridge Department. Off the top of my head, I would concur with Tim's observation that there's a lot of room on that switchback, and it's a lot wider than the traffic lanes are. But before we move forward and determine that that's where we're going to encourage parking, we will fully analyze that question.
Right, that's my understanding. I'm just concerned about the interim from when we take ownership to when we have a management plan. So GR or Stafford, Dale or Open Space, if anything comes to your concern, to your attention, that there's something we may want to do to protect the county from any unforeseen hazards there, then maybe we need to move on that sooner than a management plan, just as an interim action.
I can certainly consult with Road and Bridge and come back with
Okay.
recommendations. But I would think that no matter what goes on, that having this in public ownership is going to improve the situation as opposed to
I think in the
otherwise.
long run it will. I'm just concerned before we have a management plan.
And just if I may add, we have a meeting Thursday, which is tomorrow. This has got second reading in a week or two. So, and after that time, if it actually comes to pass, I'll make sure that our board knows that if we need to, we can have an interim management plan, which we did on Drost East Sky Mountain Park. We had an immediate interim management plan for safety as well as wildlife, and so we can do that if we need to.
Just a heads up. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, did you want to make a comment on behalf of the caucus?
Tim has covered it adequately.
Thank you. George?
I'm certainly supportive of this. I think it's a great way to honor Dottie and her memory and all of her work that she's done for the county. And I'm hoping that as you go through the management plan that we'll see some sort of plaque up there. But I also want to acknowledge the Snowmass Capitol Creek Caucus. It's just a great example of the effectiveness of caucuses and how they're able to address issues in their particular neighborhoods. So good work in terms of being able to work with the landowners to accomplish this.
Thank you, George, and I think the gentleman on your left calls us the hyperactive caucus or something like that. But in any event, we have a wonderful neighborhood, and we live in paradise, and a wonderful board, and thank you I'll pass that on.
Thank you. All right. All that being said, is there a motion to pass this on first reading and set the public reading for November 18th?
I will make a motion to approve an ordinance of the Board of County Commissioners authorizing the acquisition of the Dottie Fox Overlook property.
Second.
Okay, and I would just echo all the comments that have been made regarding the desire to honor Dottie Fox. And I would, personally credit her in the Wilderness Workshop's early involvement in helping shape the Burnt Mountain ski area addition to Snowmass as where I first met her, and Joy Caudill and Connie Harvey as well. And they really did quite a lot to shape this valley. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, thank you. We'll have a public
Thank you.
hearing on November 18th. The next item is the actual second reading, and that is an ordinance repealing Title 14 of the Asset Management Plan and reinstating Title 14 of the PitkinCounty Code as the Road Maintenance and Management Plan. And thank you both for being here today. Just introduce yourselves for the record, and please present this item.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm Melissa Sever from Public Works.
And I'm G.R. Fielding. I'm the county engineer from Public Works. This is the second reading. The board has seen this.
Pull those microphones a little closer to you. Thanks.
The board has seen this item several times in the last few months, including in work session and at first reading. I wasn't able to present at the first reading, but from my understanding, there were several questions from the board regarding some of the items in the road maintenance and management plan. The first one was a question, I believe, from Steve Childs about some of the lengths of the roadway. Staff had revisited that. There is a small amendment to the ramp, adjusting the length of Capitol Creek Road by a whole 1/10 of a mile to reflect the different service level. The entire length of the road, actually, we came up with only a few hundredths difference, but the service level change, we adjusted that for actual real world conditions, and so that was brought from 5 miles down to 4.9. Another question that I'm aware of was regarding some shoulder maintenance. Most of the maintenance on our county roads, there isn't much of a shoulder, so that gets put under the same umbrella as what would be the travel lanes. We do, during our capital projects, pay close attention to the transition from our paved surface to the unpaved shoulder portion, and we try to build those up every time we do a overlay or a chip seal. And so that's where that safety concern kind of falls under, and where we address that. And do you remember the question? And then I believe George had a question about Dinkle Lake Road. At this time, I don't think that staff would look for a hard closure of Dinkle Lake. It becomes a bit of an issue for staff with some of our harder road closures, such as on Maroon Creek Road and Castle Creek Road, because as a management tool, it's nice to set a hard date so that you set that expectation. What we end up butting up against is things like hunting season, which don't have hard dates. Every year, those dates float. And so as people come to our community to enjoy our backcountry areas and go hunting, and that it becomes a bit of becomes some work for staff to go out and notify people that, yeah, you might be allowed to hunt in this area until the 22nd, but we have to close this gate on the 15th. And so that's really where our conversation revolved around, those hard closures.
So is there an opportunity to perhaps put up some signage to just ask that people be considerate and observe that These roads in the wintertime should not be traveled on via a four-wheel drive vehicle because it does damage not only to the road but also impacts the ability for those who want to use for winter use, whether it be skiers or even snowmobilers.
Yeah, that's certainly something that we can investigate is putting up an advisory sign to that effect.
Great, thanks.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I would just tag on to that to say I think it might just be worth discussing the language a little bit with open space and trails. You know, they tend to have a crossover with cross-country skiers and things like that, so just so that there's consistent messaging, not to change what you're trying to do, but just to kind of check in.
Okay. we
Yeah.
will.
It may be that they'll come up with a better sign design than our traditional, you know, metal ordered green and white signs. So, okay. Other questions or comments on this? I actually do have one small item I'd like to bring forward, and that's item 1.35, culvert design. And I know we've discussed this many times, and maybe I'm looking at the older copy of this, and that our department takes the connectivity of the waterways, the potential of fish passage very seriously. But I think it would be good to have that as a footnote in that area for future road and bridge work crews. And again, I wasn't sure if I picked up the newest or the oldest copy of this when I left my house this morning.
Oh, no, you point taken, and we can add language in some effects.
Yeah, that
that would
to the extent possible. You know, I realize there's places where either there's no fish because it's just an irrigation ditch and it's not a matter of the connectivity, but in other places, I've seen, not here, but examples of really poor design where it drops 12 feet and so then, you know, no fish can go, you know, it's a barrier. To avoid barriers would be the best, perhaps, way to phrase that. So I'll just leave that for a modification to be made. Are there any members of the public here who would like to comment on this item? Okay, I have opened the public hearing. I will now close the public hearing. And is there a motion available?
I'll move to approve an ordinance of the Board of County Commissioners adopting the 2016 Road Maintenance and Management Plan. And thank you, guys. You did a great job.
With the small...
With the small amendments and additions.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Really
you.
appreciate
Thank you.
the hard work that went into this. We will now move on to our land use items. The first is a code amendment related to the tree removal program. That is code language that we are working on improving. We are not prepared to discuss it this time, and we're going to be continuing it. But I'd like to ask, is there any member of the public here who wanted to comment on the tree removal ordinance and work? There being none, I will close that public hearing and accept a motion to continue this item to 12/2.
Second.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye, very good. The next land use item is the review of agricultural building floor area exemptions. Let me ask my board first, does anyone want to take a break before we get into this item?
I'm good.
We'll
I'm
go
good.
straight ahead. Okay,
Yeah, let's go.
thank you.
Thanks, Rachel.
It's just we usually do that when we get into the heavy
Different
land
land
use. Okay, thank you so much. This item is a review of our agricultural building floor area exemptions. Our code, as we passed it, required a review at the end of 4 years. And so if you would just introduce yourselves for the record and walk us through it.
Great, thank you. Suzanne Wolf and Joanna Schaffner with Community Development. I don't know if I'm good with that. Won't touch it. So as you said, we in 2011 adopted amendments to the code for agricultural buildings. We followed that up in 2013 with amendments specific to greenhouses, and that's really to provide exemptions in the code for floor area for these agricultural buildings and some sort of related provisions to essentially to try and encourage or make it, you know, in some cases make a process easier or make it more available for people to do these buildings. I think you're all fairly familiar with the history, but I couldn't help but note how many meetings we had to talk about these both times. There were quite a few, which I guess at this point now, doing an update 4 years later, I would say time well spent, because really there weren't very many comments coming when I put it out to ask people what they thought, if it was, you know, being effective or doing what we wanted. It was fairly radio silent out there, which usually for us means people are okay with it, because if they weren't, we'd be hearing about it. So I'd say that's sort of generally our message today. But to walk through a little bit, some of the information we pulled together for you. On that second page of your memo, and I'm sorry I didn't put this on a drive to put up on the screen, but you have the very large summary, I guess, of all of the different exemptions we have for different types of agricultural buildings. The categories we broke it down into were hay storage buildings, livestock run-in or loafing sheds, agricultural equipment storage buildings, barns, and then greenhouses. And as you can see, there's a lot of differentiation based on lot size and what is available for people in terms of those exemptions. And again, just to be clear, this is exempt floor area on top of what a lot or parcel is allowed for its floor area. So that kind of lays out the full program. I attached rather than give you the actual code sections, I attached this handout that Joanna initially put together, and we continue to try and improve, that tries to put all this agricultural building information in one place, this chart being one piece of it, and then it really provides the language from all the applicable sections of the code that relate to agricultural buildings. Common ag buildings, the occupancy covenant and agreement that's required when someone uses the exempt square footage, the site plan review exemption for agricultural buildings, talks about the Agricultural Building Review Committee, the flexibility for agricultural support provision, and then policies and definitions that relate. So all of those show up in this handout that I attached to the packet, and that's what we give to the public to put it all in one place rather than trying to find it all in different places in the code. So that's what the things we approved. To give a little background on the first question on your review was how have the agricultural building floor area exemptions been used? We've tracked which ones, where building permits have been obtained and those covenants recorded. So that was really our tracking device, was where has a covenant been recorded against a building that utilized exempt agricultural square footage. So the way I broke that down was based on the planning areas, you know, where are we seeing people taking advantage of these, and it's pretty much across the board. I mean, in all of our planning areas, people have utilized these provisions. And they've utilized all of the provisions, all of the different types of buildings. Barn is our sort of broadest category, and that's where we've seen the most buildings. But people have also taken advantage of the specific agricultural equipment storage buildings, hay storage, loafing sheds. Those have very specific definitions attached to them. The use is really limited to what that set, you know, what that label is. Barn is a little broader, and that's where we've seen the most of them. Just to note, here where I said like barns, they've ranged from 658 to 5,755 square feet. I did not include the barn. I reference it later under the flexibility provision. What is it, High Valley Farms, I guess, barn down on Highway 82 near Basalt, did come through that flexibility for agricultural buildings provision. It obviously skews our numbers. The approval there was for 25,000 square feet for a greenhouse use and associated buildings. That was before we had greenhouse provisions in the code that would have required a special review for anything over 3,000 square feet. So it's a bit of an anomaly in here, so I didn't throw it into these numbers, but it is referenced as one of the buildings that utilized that flexibility provision. So again, we've seen about 22 buildings, 22 properties that have taken advantage of the exemptions. 32 agricultural buildings and approximately 50,000 square feet, and that's over the last 4 years. So it's being used, I think is what we can say about that. It's people are able to utilize that. We can talk more about inspections and if we're confident that they're all being used as required under their covenants. So I did refer this out to the caucuses, the people who were involved in the initial creation of these provisions, as many people as I could think of who had played a role at some point in the process, and had very little feedback. The Woody Creek Caucus District Planning Commission did provide some specific comments. One change they recommend is, right now, over 160 acres for a barn, you have unlimited square footage. And their suggestion was to change that to 58 square feet per acre, which is the standard we use, up to 70 acres, and then subject to special review. Something that we can consider in the future. And again, these recommendations are coming out of their master plan that we're currently reviewing. They expressed concern about the exempt floor area for greenhouses. They're looking at a limit of 320 square feet for personal use, 500 square feet for food production for local consumption. And they said their recommendations included no commercial growing use, comply with the home business criteria, require special review approval for greenhouses, annual review, remove derelict structures if they're not being used, and meet the criteria for local food production. So again, these are recommendations that are coming from their master plan. We're currently reviewing that. We're currently reviewing all of the, the different caucus area master plans. So I think, we'll be pulling together all of the recommendations related to, in this case, agricultural buildings and uses, and then, see where that's going to take us in terms of any future changes to the code. But obviously this will go into that, that compilation. And then Kathy Markle, who was involved with the greenhouse exemptions, said, my impression is that all is well and people are content. Holy moly. So yeah, that was nice. Again, I'll walk through some of the different provisions. The Ag Building Review Committee currently has 4 members, Rio Jacober, Bob Petrock, Bill McKee, and Mike Thomas. Since October of 2011, they've met 6 times, reviewed 18 structures, of which 17 were approved. They're not necessarily seeing all ag buildings. We make a determination of which ones we feel would be useful to have them review and give us comments on. Joanna has dealt with those, has worked with the committee, so she can probably provide more background on that. She did get comments from one. Mike Thomas submitted some comments, which I attached. I think they're really helpful. I think we've kind of struggled with the committee, and they're obviously, I think, struggling themselves with what is their role, are they being useful to us? And I think that's something we do need to look at as we continue forward with that. I think his comment, the standard of review for them, which is to determine if agricultural buildings are designed to support an agricultural operation and are functional for agricultural uses, he says it kind of limits them. And he said if the bigger goal is to preserve the rural character of the county, then they need more powers, more ability to really look at something. And on some level, there's that gut feeling of, boy, might be designed to look this way, but I can't really, see that it's going to be used this way in the future. So anyway, I think we don't know what the answer is to make that better, but I think that's something to look at if we want to keep the committee. So I think that's sort of a point of discussion and something to consider for the future with that committee. The flexibility for agricultural support, I mentioned, it's a provision that allows an owner to obtain additional exempt floor area if a property does not meet the minimum acreage required, or if the exempt floor area provided is not adequate to support a specific agricultural operation. This actually existed in the code prior to 2011. It was carried forward. It was changed a little bit in 2013 to limit how much the community development director could grant through this flexibility provision, and then basically establishing thresholds above which it would bump up to the BOCC. Since 2011, we've only seen it used twice, once for some additional, somebody who'd utilized all of their actual agricultural exemptions and needed a little bit more for a greenhouse and a root cellar. and then the High Valley Farms example. We had seen it used several times prior to 2011. Again, we sort of used 2011 as that baseline for moving forward. But I think it had been utilized 3 or 4 times prior to 2011. So again, that has provided a little bit of a relief valve for people who just aren't quite getting enough, or and can come to us and say, here, I have a legitimate need for this building, but the code's not letting me get there. So I think that has been utilized in an appropriate manner. The site plan review exemptions was definitely an issue for people before 2011, where they were being taken through our full site plan process, the same as a house. And that was time and money and a definite roadblock for people. So we included the site plan review exemption for ag buildings of less than 4,060 square feet or greenhouses of less than 3,000, subject to certain criteria. You're not in a constrained area, you're consistent with the rural character guidelines, not visible or limited visual impact, setbacks of 1.5 times the required setbacks. If you don't meet those, you just go to site plan review. It's not that you don't get your ag building, it just means you're in a different process. Some people have used those. I mean, it hasn't been, they haven't been knocking down the doors to come in for their permits. A lot of times we are still seeing the ag buildings as part of a site plan, because people are coming into site plan for their house and everything else they're doing on the property. So in some cases they're not needing that, but we are seeing people who have existing development on their properties and just want to add a barn or some form of ag building, and are coming in to do that. So I think that has helped people move forward in that process to go straight to building permit. And then inspections, that restrictive covenant gives us the ability to request an inspection. Prior to this meeting, we did just sort of pick a few off of our list to go do inspections. Joanna conducted those inspections, so if you have questions about that, she can respond to that. We contacted 4 owners. Did you get to the 4th finally? Or did you? Okay, so when I wrote this, she'd done 3 of the 4. I guess now there's been 4 of the 4. So of the 3, 2 of the 3 were being used consistent with the uses specified in the covenant. One was just not really being used for anything, not agricultural, but not anything else. They weren't storing their boat or anything in it either, so it just wasn't being used. So again, I think this is a place where we'd be looking for direction from you if that's something you want us to pursue, is really a more rigorous or comprehensive inspection program to follow up with some of these agricultural buildings. So to the question of should the agricultural building flora exemptions be retained, modified, or repealed, I think our answer is clearly that they should be retained. I think people are utilizing them. Again, I don't think we're not hearing complaints from the public. We're not really having complaints or issues on our end. They're being used, and I think primarily being used as intended. Obviously, I mentioned the caucus master plans are all being updated. I foresee some recommendations coming out of those that could lead to potential changes to these provisions for the ag buildings. So I see that kind of on the horizon. We've also been considering, and I think the master plans will be critical to that, is looking at, we sort of limited this to agricultural buildings, and we didn't delve much more into the broader agricultural activities or other agricultural things that might support agriculture that we're not getting at in our code today. And some of those things that have popped up over time, sort of ideas around sustainable agriculture, which I won't even start to guess what that may be, but it keeps popping up. Agritourism, uses on an agricultural property to help you support, so you can keep your property agricultural but bring in income from other. That's something we've heard in the past. Way back when there was the agricultural committee up the Crystal, I think, a number of years ago. What other uses are compatible and can support that agricultural use. Processing of agricultural products is starting to pop up more. We all like to see cows out in the fields, but they're all getting sent far away to get processed. And that's been an interesting topic when it's popped up, because they're concerns. Nobody really wants that kind of a facility near them, but where could it work? So I think that'll be kind of an interesting topic with folks. And then agricultural research / education facilities, again, what might be on an agricultural property that, to support that. So again, those are just some of the things that have surfaced. I'm sure there are plenty more. And Ed Vardy is here, and he's definitely interested in, I think, helping with that, and other sort of some of the other ideas that are out there for agricultural properties. And I think that's it. Our recommendation is that we retain the exemptions, and there may be some tweaks down the road, but certainly looking to get your input and thoughts on that.
Patty, you'd like to start?
Yeah, this is great, because I remember when it started way back. Actually, now it's in writing before me, and it's being put to use. And I'm glad to hear that we're not having huge issues of abuse of those agricultural buildings. I think the comments submitted from Mike Thomas from the Agricultural Committee were interesting. He talks about, are we being gamed? Are they manipulating the Board of County Commissioners? Since it's just from one member of the Ag Committee, I think maybe sometime after the first of the year, we should probably think about a work session to meet with the Ag Committee and talk about their concerns as a whole group, not just one member, see how the feeling is overall. And might be interesting to find some new membership to that committee, somebody who represents maybe the educational values of agriculture, which I think we're seeing more of, and use of those properties to educate, especially our younger generations, as to sustainable agriculture and sustainability of growing your own food. I think, too, when you're talking about processing the agricultural, be it a cow or a tomato, it would be interesting in the future, just to add as a note for further discussion, kitchens where people can actually put them on somebody's agricultural property, where we could actually be used by the neighborhood, like a community kitchen for processing tomatoes, potatoes, carrots, you name it. So we can generate that. That's a big concern throughout the state of Colorado, as far as how we can help facilitate that, so we can actually put to good use bigger crops than what you can grow in your own little greenhouse, but what you can grow on a parcel. I think I'm really at this point not supportive of reducing square footage for greenhouse for personal use. You might start out with 250 square feet and find that you're really good at it, so 600, and then there's another need. You can feed your neighborhood. I don't have a problem with that at all. So I think that should be part of the discussion with the master plans. I think there's probably a lot of things that are going to come out of the master plans, because most of them, those caucuses, have agricultural uses in there. Well, I think they all do. So I think that'll be part of the bigger discussion when we get down to the specific master plan changes or thoughts that come out of that, and how we may or may not want to bring them into code. But this is really good information, and thanks. It was nice to see it come back.
Thank you. George?
So Suzanne, do you think with the caucuses, as they've been updating their master plans, they actually had a discussion in terms of possible other uses on ag lands, whether it be for facilities, for slaughterhouses, to ag tourism?
At this point, I don't know what, if those conversations have been had. I've, seen some of the drafts along the way of the master plans. Again, I know that the processing issue, or particularly specifically slaughtering, I know has popped up in the Emma area. But we've also been talking to somebody up the Crystal, where it's also come up. So again, I don't know if it's coming up as much at the master plan level or not. I guess that remains to be seen.
So as those discussions go forward, if there's any of those ideas that want to be pursued, then of course you bring those caucuses into those discussions for their input if they haven't already addressed it in their master
definitely.
plans.
I mean, I think we've heard certain things just on the street, I guess. Other things are going to come out of the master plans, but I think all of that will, then roll together into, a possible potential code amendments kind of a process that will then go back through all of those caucuses, similar to what we did here, where, the caucus roundtable approach, I think, was useful, and to sort of say, well, here's everything we're hearing from everybody, where do we really need to ahead with all of that.
The other question I have is concerning the committee, because reading Mike's comments, he thought that their committee really was more or less just rubber stamping an application. But have they, in any of their applications, have they given any comments that perhaps we would have looked at differently in any of those applications?
I'm going to turn to Joanna since she's
Not being denied, or just questioned in terms of the size or the location or the style, any of their inputs that they have given or might have given that that perhaps we would have taken a closer look at in terms of listening to the committee.
I think that I think that they don't feel they have the authority to address some of those issues, and that their scope is very limited. I think that the buildings that we presented were basically shells of buildings, and it was felt that any building can be used for agriculture. You could stuff hay in any building or put your tractor in any building. And so they didn't really have much to go on. A lot of the applications that were presented by the architect or were presented by their professional representatives, not by anybody that would be working the ranch, or most times not even the owner. So I don't know, you know, one of the comments I found interesting was in the review of a barn up Castle Creek, and it was fairly large barn, and the committee members were in agreement that it was probably bigger than it needed to be, and really, really nice, and all of them would have loved to have had a barn like that, you know. And just because you can afford it doesn't mean, you know, they're trying not to have those biases. The barns are coming in, some of them are bigger, and you have to, you know, the use is somewhat ambiguous, but yeah, I don't think they would have comments like that to address here.
Coming up with some sort of checklist to help the committee and to allow them, so they feel that they have a little more input into the process.
Yeah, I think to review the whole plan for the whole operation. But the buildings that they're getting are generally before the operation is established. And so people don't really have numbers. They don't really have all of the information that the board might be asking for, because it hasn't started up yet. You know, they want their buildings and then they'll get an ag use. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think the committee is a valuable asset for the county, for staff, because this whole process it was a grassroots process to begin with, in terms of looking at the ag regulations. And so being a grassroots effort to begin with, I think it's important to maintain that citizen involvement and to make sure that they have a voice. I thought the original intent was to ensure that any ag buildings that were being considered were actually going to be utilized as ag and not as a garage or as a party facility. They were going to look at the style to make sure it sort of fit in with the neighborhood, the size, as well as the location. It was not going to impact any neighbors. So I think there's still a valuable use for that committee. So I hope there's ways that we can encourage them to stay on and see how we can utilize them more effectively.
Yeah, Patty, please.
So would you then support a work session, bringing the committee members in? I don't know how long it's been since you've actually met with them and actually listened to their concerns and suggestions. Yeah, so maybe it's time we do that, and I think it should probably be done, if possible, before the master plans, which are broader than just the agricultural uses. But so we hear from them before we have a discussion with the caucuses about their master plans.
Well, that's fine, but you know, in regards to the master plan, what I understand is the master plans are actually adopted by the P&Z, by state statute, and it's really more of a courtesy, or in terms of when it comes before the BOCC for ratification.
Right, I understand that, but if it comes to code amendments that may be generated out of the master plans, it comes to the BOCC.
Right.
And so I think it'd be worth our time to have a discussion with the ag committee members and the ag community that's concerned at a work session where we can actually get into what's working, what's not working, what suggestions the ag committee has.
Sure.
So we can look at making those changes if needed, as needed.
Yeah.
And just I was going to say one other thing about the committee. I mean, I don't think, Joanna, correct me, but have we ever had the required 5 members? I mean, technically, their bylaws say
Right.
5.
No, we've not had
We've,
five.
we've definitely struggled with members for that committee.
And can I ask, is it, you know, we have some committees where we have members that are only reside in Pitkin County. Sometimes we go outside of that, especially if they're doing ag operations, maybe inside the county, but they may actually reside outside. Maybe that'll help
Have
us
to look
generate.
back at the bylaws.
Yeah, that might help us generate members. We're actually now doing ag activities within the county.
And that would be something to consider at
Yeah,
the work
just
session.
wanted to bring that to your attention.
Yeah. You know, sometimes it's challenging to get members for committees that meet more irregularly, and it may be more challenging when they don't feel they have quite as much real authority.
Right.
So I fully support the idea of going forward with a work session to continue to refine this and to have a chance to thank them in person for their efforts. I wanted to ask a few questions as well, and then if anybody else has anything that comes up, we'll go back around. Has it achieved the goal that was also mentioned of more attractive barns, that we wouldn't have these squat, low-level
No,
barns?
design isn't really addressed. Well, the height, the squattiness was addressed through code amendments to increase the height. But that was, I think, a criticism of the board, of the committee, that there wasn't anything to make them look like ag buildings. And so when they go right up next to the house, like one or two of them have, they look they have more of a
Look like a house.
residential feel, and they're getting an exemption for an ag use to support agriculture in Pitkin County, and then it doesn't really come off looking like agriculture. There's no requirement that says, look agricultural.
Okay, well, I think that would be something certainly to discuss, and I'm glad for your frankness in the answer. You know, I am very supportive of what has been done. I also am supportive of refining going forward, because you know, I look at that and it's, as you said, the one larger greenhouse may have skewed the numbers, but it's 50,000 square feet in 4 years since we enacted this. And you know, it may have been pent-up demand and that was a peak, but on the other hand, if we see 50,000 square feet every 4 years, it starts to really add up, and especially if they're not having the appearance of ag buildings and having the appearance of you know, a 10,000 square foot home or 9,000 square foot home, when our county has tried to move away from those sort of activities. So I truly think that that is something to look at. I personally am really glad that we're doing some inspections, and I believe that that is important. You know, when people make a commitment that this is the use, that's what their professional representatives are saying to us. They're receiving an exemption without having, you know, any buy a TDR or you know, affordable housing mitigation or things like that. It has to follow that use. And so what would the procedure be if someone was found that it had been turned into a, you know, partial party room and living quarters after it had been approved, and they'd taken the plumbing for the one, you know, emergency shower and toilet and turned it into kitchen water and all sorts of other things? What are our powers on that?
I think, like with any other violation, they have the opportunity to correct it and revert back to agriculture, or they have an opportunity to come in and get it permitted as residential space, which would then presumably require some kind of growth management if they were over their 5750 allowance.
Yeah. I think that we would want to look at what those punishments are during this work session to see if they're adequate. You know, getting it in through an exemption and then saying, okay, now I'm going to correct the fact that I didn't do it right, and I'm going to buy a TDR or two or something like that. That probably is not an obstacle for a great many of the folks buying and building these. And I would like to make sure that it is a sufficient barrier to misuse because of what the penalties would be.
Well, in some areas that have a floor area cap, Emma and Snowmass Capital, you know, that their cap of 8,250, you know, somebody who's built a large barn and then, you know, isn't used as a barn and then comes back, I mean, they
have
may
no
end up-
corrective
Right, they have no option under growth management or use of TDRs,
Yeah.
other than removal if it's
Yeah.
not being used.
Well, and I just would like to look at, see if there are any intermediate steps, or should there be any actual fines or other types of you know, it's always very hard, I'd say, for a board to say, hey, I know you got 800,000 in it, but tear it down. Or I know you got $1.5 million in it, but tear it down. And, you know, how do you prevent it from coming to that level? And so I think that, you know, just like any new program or you just continue to refine it and improve it. So then I guess the other question I was thinking of a little bit is, as the caucuses are finishing up their master planning effort, are there specific questions that we should ask them to discuss in advance of, or have they already been covered? Or the other things that you've discussed, Suzanne, too nebulous at this point for them to really have a discussion of what some of these other items
again,
mean?
none of those things I think have been fleshed out on our end at this point.
So
Again, it's just sort of ideas that have surfaced. So we're just trying to track those. I don't think at this point, you know, we're ready to, I don't know, you know, throw all of those out to the caucuses. I guess, you know, more in the stage of let's gather the information and see what other ideas may be coming from the caucuses. Again, I haven't spent enough time in all of those master plans yet to say, oh yeah, we're seeing a lot of related to agricultural or not. You know, I just don't have that sense yet. So.
Okay.
I guess premature at this point. We'll see what all comes from that, see if any of the things that we've heard on our list are showing up out of the caucus master plans or not, and then move forward from there.
Okay, thank you. This is a land use action. It is not a public hearing, but I see that we have a member of the public who's interested in these issues and has worked on this committees, or not the committee, but the general code changes. Do you have any comments you'd like to make? And if so, you'll have to come up to a microphone. And just identify yourself for the record, please.
My name is Eden Vardy, and I'm with Aspen Tree. And overall, I really want to commend the efforts, and I think that Suzanne and the P&Z have just done an exceptional job.
Okay.
I would definitely suggest not reducing the greenhouse allowance.
Okay.
If there is going to be any refinement efforts in the process, I would suggest almost making a differentiation between structures that are going to be dedicated for sustainable local food production versus general agricultural use, and if that differentiation is made, to streamline the process for those constituents, because it's hard enough to start a farm, especially for a young farmer, and I think that it's a very different demographic of someone that wants to genuinely grow food for the community, and someone that wants to build, you know, a nice barn for their horses or for their, you know, as a party space or something. So I think that
Gentlemen ranchers.
So there's a clear difference, and I think if there is going to be a refinement, maybe identifying some benchmarks that could differentiate, you know, the farmer that's going to be growing food for the community and other agricultural buildings.
That might be hard to pinpoint, but it's certainly something for us to try to look at. I agree.
I mean, there's a few things that I think that could be very easy. For instance, in greenhouse structures, there's now going online and growing in demand rolling non-permanent hoop houses. So they're movable and there's no concrete foundation. And those, I think, should be, you know, the requirements for getting those approved should be much less so than a permanent greenhouse. So things like that, I think that there are ways to look at it, and I'd be happy to help support that process.
Well, thank
but
you.
overall, I'm really grateful for what these two have done. And
Don't go
really,
anywhere.
Yeah, and certainly when we pull this work together, we'd like to make sure you're included, and any of your colleagues. It would be a chance for the general public as well to improve this. And so, Patty, you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to put in a thank you to Eden for his work at Cozy Point and his educational work with the youth from all ages in this community, in this valley, for sustainable agriculture, growing your own, living off your own land. But I also want to point out, just so the board knows, that it's my understanding, Eden, that you've been teaching a class at CMC in permaculture and sustainability, and so he's taking it to the next level, and I think that's great. Eden's made a real effort in this valley to bring this industry, if you want to call it, this philosophy into the valley, and I think it's got a long way to go, and I'm hoping that we can further that So thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Patty. And we have a lot of plans that we're prepared to implement, assuming the master plan goes in the right direction with Cozy Point Ranch for a lot of those kind of things that are coming up from the different caucus master plans for implementing them on site there, which can be used as kind of an experiment for how the county wants to approach those in the bigger picture. So I'd be happy to share all that with you as the time gets closer.
That would probably be a valuable thing. I've actually heard from one citizen, and it's a passing remark. It was not very specific, but it was like, don't let them turn all of Cozy Point into a farm. You know, when the city bought it, it was to be a wonderful pasture and opening and things like that. I have no idea where the master plan is right now, and I know our Open Space and Trails is working with it, but it would be good to kind of come up to speed as to where it is evolving before it's, you know, a fait accompli, and to be able to have a work session or some information on that. So that's another meeting you guys can schedule for us coming up in the...
And a note to that is then there's the flip side of that from the other local efforts that would like it to be totally horse-related, equestrian-related, and no farming. So
oh, I know,
we're
it's got to be a
hoping
balance,
we're
but
hoping we get a
I'd like
balance
to
in there.
kind of see what they're coming up with.
It's a perfect parcel for balanced use.
It is certainly a city-owned parcel, but it's in the county, and it's part of a collection of parcels that have been bought by one entity or another, and there's a lot of connectivity to them, a lot of value. I mean, actually, I was on the city council when we had our retreat, and it was my birthday. Love spending my birthday in a council retreat where we made the decision to buy Cozy Point Ranch. So really glad to see that.
Thank you for
I always
doing
thought
that.
it was my birthday present. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ed.
Okay.
Thank you.
The other comment I would have is I think that we need maybe a little refinement, or it's not refinement, but just a section to note it. When we first started on this plan, it was before the legalization of marijuana occurred in Colorado. And so we now see, you know, confusion, I'd say, at some point. Is it a commercial product? Is it a pharmaceutical product? Is it agriculture? Is it, you know, what people think of traditional agriculture? Is it new agriculture? And how does that relate to our greenhouse ordinances? Because I don't know that we need to make a clear statement that the production of recreational medical marijuana is not considered an agricultural use. That these exemptions from the land use code are not available to that use. I don't know, but I mean, I know it has to be permitted separately through us in theory, but if someone was in that caretaker mode and I'm growing 6 plants for 30 people and I want a 600 square foot greenhouse exemption, is that agriculture, is that not? And so I think that there just needs to be some real clarity there. We've certainly heard from caucuses such as the Woody Creek that they don't want any grow facilities of any type in their community. Our own codes can only go so far with that because of the state law, but I do think we may need additional clarity in this since other laws have evolved since we passed it.
And to tag onto that, there's the industry of hemp, which is going to be, I think we're going to be hearing about that more and more now that people are able to either produce hemp seeds in the state or bring them into the state, which wasn't allowed at the beginning. And hemp can, you know, be grown in fields. It's an amazing crop with, yeah, but it looks like marijuana, and, you know, but it doesn't, I don't know if it smells like marijuana, but the uses are so, you know, broad. And the agricultural production, you know, it's not a water sucker, you know, it's a good drought crop. So we may be seeing more of that. So that may have to be part of our discussion too, as to, because it's not grown in a greenhouse, it's grown in fields.
Yep.
So
I'd agree with that.
they keep throwing, you know, throwing new stuff at us all the time, and it's why we sit here.
But again, I do not want to have any of this discussion of where do we go from here to imply any sort of disrespect or lack of appreciation for the work that's done so far, for the committee members, and, you know, for the code itself. It seems to be working, people are implementing it, and we'll just continue to move forward and make it better.
Right.
Do we need any formal action on this item? It's just a review.
Just for discussion?
It's just for discussion.
I mean, I didn't attach, you know, our recommendation is to retain. I mean, the review provision just sort of said you're supposed to make a
finding to
Review how they've
retain.
been used and whether the exemptions shall be retained, modified, or repealed. So I don't know if,
Okay, would someone like to
An
make a
action's
motion that we
appropriate.
retain the current code with a upcoming work session to follow in 2016?
And I want to add to, I'll make a motion to do that, but I want to add to that that we will also take into consideration any issues that evolve out of the ongoing caucus master plans as part of any ag changes, recommendations, or just leaving it as it is.
Before asking for a second on that, the only thing I'd be concerned is if one master plan is like really lagging behind and we're not ready to review it till, or P&Z isn't going to review it till later. We don't want to delay looking at this in case they're all not in the same cycle.
I mean, I think in terms of the initial work session, I think, you know, I heard sort of early next year. I think we want to move that forward. I don't think at that point, you know, we will have cycled through all of the master plans. I mean, we can start to, you know, bring forward the ideas that are coming out of that.
Yeah.
But I think that process is going to roll, you know, through the spring, getting those adopted.
Before we be looking at any code changes or modifications to those
Right, I mean,
plans.
just
Sure.
to get the master plans
So
adopted.
it's just part of a
so-
discussion.
But, so yeah, I think we want to
Okay,
move forward.
well,
with
well
the-
noted. I just wanted to be clear on that. Is there a second to?
Second?
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming in. We appreciate your hard work. We are now to the open discussion portion of our agenda. John, what do you have for us?
Yeah, I've got most of mine planned for tomorrow, but an election result that was not reported in the papers is finally we have a Woody Creek Metro District
Oh,
approved.
yes.
So that did happen yesterday. I got
Oh,
that
yeah, it wasn't
email
in the
this
paper.
morning. They ran their election outside. Outside of the clerk's office. We assisted them with it, but apparently
Okay.
that passed. I don't have the exact results, but that's been a long time coming, and this board's
I
been
had been
involved.
wondering about that. That's nice to find out. Very good.
And then, did you want to?
Yeah,
talk
I
about
I
that?
was, let me check the other board members first. Any open discussion items? George?
Sort of following up on the election results, and which I think, as Rachel mentioned, I thought it was great that the community continues to support education and health and technical and safety concerns. One of my questions I guess I have is, given the increase in mill levies and the imposition it may play on some of our retirees, those on fixed incomes, I believe it's a state statute that that once you reach 65, that you're allowed to reduce your assessed value by $100,000 as that pertains to collection of mill levies.
You
I'm
mean
not sure.
homestead exemption?
I'm not sure what the exemption is, but I know that it's employed by several counties around the state.
So is it a state or is it per county?
Per county.
Per county. So it may be interesting for us to have a discussion at some point whether we want to expand that that provision beyond 100,000, because the real estate in PitkinCounty, of course, is the most expensive real estate in the state. And so perhaps when that was first put forward, 100,000 might have seemed a good benefit. But I think at this point, given the real estate values and given what we're seeing as aging demographics in our community and the values that they have seen on their homes, and they're struggling to try to stay in the community on a fixed income, I think is something we should perhaps look at and see whether we can raise that.
What I would suggest is that for John Peacock on a future agenda, we have Tom Oken and with John Ely give us a little presentation on what the state statute is and what does it allow. And I think at the very least, I'm not sure we would be able to, I don't know if it allows the flexibility to change that limit. And I seem to think it was 125,000, but I'm not sure. It's been a while.
It's 50% of the first $200,000.
Okay, so it's
of value that can be
100,000.
exempted, and there was and the part that I'm unsure of now is there was a backfill provision where the state would backfill lost property taxes.
Yes.
I don't believe that's been funded recently, so.
But I think a
we'll
work
have to
session on it.
background you guys on
And
that.
a full background from Tom and others and take a look. And go from there.
Yeah,
So I think that's a good point, George.
I think
Thanks
it's a
for
really
raising
good point, and Larry Fite should probably be there, somebody from the assessor's office. But yeah, it's interesting because I'd like to know what qualifies people for that exemption. I think there's some very
Is
specific
it means
guidelines.
tested at all?
And it's how long you have to live in your house. It's not just for somebody with a big second home that's over the age of 65. I mean, there's certain qualifications, and I don't know that information, and I like to have that on hand also.
You know, and that jogs my memory. It was 2 or 3 years ago at Michael's suggestion, we brought an item to CCI for a potential legislative change, because if you receive any income at all from the house or the residence, you're not able to take the exemption. And he was saying, look, you know, some of these people are taking a roommate, and it's $500 a month to try and stay in the place, and then therefore they can't get this exemption. And we did try that down at CCI, and no one wanted a larger exemption that the state would have to backfill, frankly. And it turned out that some communities had been very aggressive about getting their seniors the exemption, and other communities were kind of quiet about it. And so they pointed to those counties to say, well, you've got 1,100 people who have exemptions in your county. Who's paying the tax? And we don't want that to happen to our county. So it is a bigger issue that we need to look at and see where we are now. But I agree with the general sentiment, and doing what we can. The other open discussion items for Patty?
No, I know you just wanted to talk about that one, but just, John, what is our schedule for tomorrow? Till 5 o'clock? We're here from 10 to 5?
Now, depending, we have a number of items at the end which tend to be kind of updates, open discussion, future agendas. Sometimes those go faster or slower depending on the number of items. We do have some open discussion items to cover with you tomorrow.
I just know that we have a special event for Chris
That's
Selden
correct.
tomorrow, and I want to make sure that the board, whoever wants to be there, can be there before Chris leaves, so we can give him our thanks and our congratulations and our best wishes.
Well, I didn't bring my agenda for tomorrow with me, but I'm under the impression we have an hour lunch break.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if the board is, if scheduling and posting it allows us to work through that lunch hour, perhaps it would be appropriate to consider brown bagging it and then take, a little bit of time
Take a
for
half-hour
lunch.
break and then do open discussion or something.
Yeah, and so
That'd be great,
I'll
Rachel.
float that out there to the
That's a
board
great
so that
idea.
we can try and tighten that schedule up. Okay. John, do you have any other open discussion?
No.
George, you're done. Patty?
I'm good.
Okay. I would like to bring back the concept of making a contribution from our contingency fund to the 3rd Street Center. I mentioned it earlier. They had about $15,000 worth of fire damage. The one nonprofit that I received an email about fundraising efforts is actually moving to Rifle, where they have another location. They're not going to try and rebuild. Some of the nonprofits may have individual needs as opposed to the building and the structure itself, but we haven't heard to that. And I would like to suggest that we make a contribution of $750 from our contingency fund, which would be approximately 15% of the uninsured deductible that they need to cover.
I'm generally supportive of that. I guess my question is, the nonprofit is no longer going to be using that space, so that space will then go back into the rental pool,
release.
and does the insurance cover not only that space, but does the 3rd Street Center also have insurance that covers the entire facility as well?
Yeah, let me have John. I didn't look into it, so I get a little more detail.
I actually just spoke with the 3rd Street Center, and so the fire damage is being covered by the 3rd Street Center and by their insurance. They have a $5,000 deductible on that work. The nonprofit isn't covering any damage to the structure. It was loss of furniture, whatever, other
damage.
equipment, was lost in the fire, was their loss. So the 3rd Street Center is covering all the structural damage, and that's where the $5,000 deductible comes in.
Yeah, so this would not be helping an individual nonprofit at all,
Correct.
but it would be helping the management group of
Okay.
the building.
Just the
Thanks for-
3rd
thanks
Street,
for clarifying.
Yeah. So I would.
I totally support it.
Do we need? I would make a motion to the effect that we allocate $750 from our contingency fund to the repairs of the structure of the, or the deductible of the 3rd Street Center.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for bringing that forward, Rachel.
Okay, I think that's the last item on our agenda today. Thank you, Grassroots, especially for the extra hassle of setting up in this temporary room, and we really
wait, one more-
appreciate. Well, Patty
one
has
more
one more
thing.
thing. Okay.
I just was looking at my emails. Just so to let the board know, at my last Northwest COG meeting, the issue of the Colorado Bark Beetle Coalition Cooperative came up, and they're trying to look at what they want to do with it. Do they want to try and reinvigorate it? Do they want to just get rid of it? So they have asked me, because they have no electeds involved, and because of my past, I just want the board to know, they have asked me to at least attend this first meeting, which I just got a thing on, which will be, it's in Breckenridge. So it's, it's kind of a little hike, but it's a week from Friday. I just want to let the board know that I'm going to be attending that, and I'll keep you updated as to if that effort's going to go anywhere or if it's what's happening.
No, it's nice to, you always have to check back on these things, because the bark beetle and the dead trees haven't gone away yet.
Yep.
And actually, that reminds me of one other thing I had thought of. When we had our joint meeting with Basalt last week, we talked a lot about our 2 management teams getting together to kind of decide a process going forward. And Patty had mentioned that through Northwest COG, there was the economic development grants potential availability. And I'm just wondering if we could have John Redmond with our finance department or someone really kind of vet that more thoroughly in terms of knowing when to apply, what applies, where to apply. Is there a limit for the whole region? Just let's take it from more of a nebulous concept to something that we can really look at and see if it fits, and how we could make our project fit as a potential low-cost funding source.
Well, if you would like, I can get John in touch with Rachel Looney, who runs the Economic Development District. And that's another thing. If I'm going to be in Breckenridge, I've been trying to set up a meeting, sit down with Liz Moa and Rachel Looney over in Silverthorne. So maybe that's a perfect opportunity. After, if I'm in Breckenridge, I might as well just drive down the road.
Or at least mention that
we're no, but it would be great. I can sit down and talk with John about it and see if...
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I
that's
just
a great idea.
Get some more solidity
So I
behind
just
it.
talked to Rachel, to Liz on Monday, saying that I kind of feel disconnected with Northwest COG because we don't have face-to-face meetings. So I was going to try and set something up. So the opportunity to be in Breckenridge is probably perfect timing if she's available.
Yeah, you do an hour before, hour after, or something like that. Great. Okay, thank you. And if there's nothing more, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I will second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Thanks,
Thank you very
Grassroots.
much, Grassroots.
So, John, we can leave.